For centuries, the British monarchy has been built upon traditions, laws, and constitutional principles so old that many people assume they belong only in history books. Yet every so often, an ancient rule unexpectedly returns to the center of modern events, reminding everyone that the foundations of royal power were laid long before today's headlines ever existed. Recently, a remarkable narrative has captured the attention of royal watchers across the United Kingdom because it combines nearly everything that fascinates audiences about the monarchy: palace intrigue, family tensions, hidden legal arguments, succession politics, and a future king determined to protect what he believes belongs at the heart of the crown. According to supporters of the story, the controversy began with a quiet proposal that almost nobody knew existed, but would eventually spark one of the most dramatic confrontations ever rumored inside royal circles. According to many commentators, what makes the narrative so compelling is not the alleged conflict itself, but the way it supposedly unfolded. There were no public arguments broadcast across television screens, no dramatic palace press conferences, no official declarations announcing a constitutional crisis. Instead, supporters of the narrative claim everything began behind closed doors while public attention remained focused elsewhere. At the center of the story stood concerns surrounding King Charles III's health and reports that his schedule had become increasingly restricted during periods of medical treatment. As speculation surrounding the king's condition continued attracting media attention, few people were paying attention to what some observers describe as unusual activity taking place behind the scenes. According to supporters of the narrative, this activity allegedly revolved around discussions concerning titles, privileges, and future recognition for individuals connected to Queen Camilla's wider family. At first glance, such discussions may not appear especially controversial. Royal families have always navigated complex questions involving status, protocol, and public roles. However, according to the story, what made the situation different was the manner in which the proposal was allegedly advanced. Rather than emerging through traditional channels involving advisors, consultations, and formal review processes, supporters of the narrative claim the plan was developed quietly and presented under circumstances that would later become the subject of intense debate. Whether any of these claims are accurate remains impossible to independently verify. Nevertheless, they quickly became central to the story. According to many royal analysts, Prince William allegedly became concerned not because of the proposal's contents alone, but because of what the proposal might represent for the future of the monarchy. For years, commentators have associated William with the concept of a streamlined royal institution, one focused primarily on the direct line of succession, and a smaller group of working royals carrying out official duties. Supporters of the narrative argue that any attempt to significantly expand royal privileges beyond those boundaries would naturally attract his attention. Critics caution that much of this interpretation relies on speculation rather than confirmed information. Even so, the perception has become an important part of how many observers understand the story. As reports continued circulating, questions began multiplying. Who had approved the proposal? Who knew about it? And perhaps most importantly, who stood to benefit from it? According to supporters of the narrative, these questions allegedly led William to begin examining the situation more closely. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way many observers believe significant palace matters are often handled. Rather than responding through speeches or media statements, the future king reportedly focused on gathering information and understanding exactly what was taking place behind the scenes. According to many commentators, this restrained approach reflects a pattern frequently associated with William. Supporters often describe him as someone who prefers preparation over confrontation and strategy over public conflict. Instead of reacting immediately, they argue, he tends to assess situations carefully before deciding how to respond. Whether that characterization is entirely accurate remains open to debate, but it plays a significant role in the narrative that has developed around the story. What makes the situation particularly fascinating is that the alleged investigation reportedly led William toward an unexpected discovery. According to supporters of the narrative, the deeper he looked into the proposal and its implications, the more he became convinced that the issue involved far more than a simple request for additional recognition. Instead, they claim he began viewing it as a question about the future boundaries of royal authority itself. And according to many observers, that realization would soon lead him toward an unlikely ally, Princess Anne, and eventually toward an ancient piece of royal legislation dating back to 1772 that almost nobody expected to hear discussed in the 21st century. According to many royal commentators, the story allegedly becomes far more serious once Prince William begins looking beyond the proposal itself and starts asking questions about how it was created, who had access to it, and why it was reportedly being discussed so quietly. Supporters of the narrative claim that what initially appeared to be an ordinary palace matter gradually evolved into something much larger because the deeper William looked, the more he allegedly became convinced that the issue was not simply about ceremonial recognition. Instead, according to those observers, it became a question about the future structure of royal authority and whether long-standing constitutional boundaries were being tested in ways that could have consequences far beyond a single proposal. According to the narrative, concerns intensified because reports suggested that the proposal involved expanded privileges, greater visibility, and formal recognition for members of Queen Camilla's wider family. Supporters of the story argue that this immediately raised difficult questions inside royal circles because the modern monarchy has spent years moving in the opposite direction. Under both Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles III, discussions increasingly focused on maintaining a smaller working monarchy rather than expanding it. As a result, many observers allegedly viewed the proposal as being fundamentally at odds with the broader direction the institution appeared to be taking. What made the situation particularly sensitive was timing. King Charles's health was already attracting public attention. Questions about succession were becoming more common, and Prince William's influence inside the institution was steadily growing. According to supporters of the narrative, these factors created an environment in which even relatively small decisions could carry enormous symbolic significance. A proposal that might have been ignored under different circumstances suddenly became the subject of intense scrutiny because it touched upon issues involving succession, legitimacy, and the future balance of influence inside the royal family. According to many commentators, William allegedly resisted the temptation to respond publicly. There were no speeches, no leaks to friendly newspapers, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, supporters of the narrative claim he focused on understanding every detail before deciding how to proceed. This approach, they argue, reflected a characteristic that many royal observers frequently associate with William: a preference for preparation over emotion and strategy over immediate reaction. As reports continued circulating, another concern allegedly emerged. Who exactly had authorized the proposal? Who had reviewed it? And what constitutional standing would such a document actually possess? These questions became increasingly important because supporters of the narrative argue that many assumptions surrounding royal authority are often misunderstood by the public. The monarchy operates through laws, through conventions, through precedent, and through procedures developed across centuries. Contrary to popular belief, significant constitutional changes cannot simply be created through private agreements or informal understandings. Because of this, the proposal allegedly attracted growing attention from individuals concerned with royal governance and institutional legitimacy. According to supporters of the narrative, William gradually reached the conclusion that the matter required more than a simple administrative review. They claim he believed the issue touched directly upon the principles that define who belongs within the formal structure of the monarchy and who remains connected to it only through personal relationships. Whether this interpretation accurately reflects William's thinking remains impossible to verify. Nevertheless, it became a central element of the story that later developed. What happened next is one of the most fascinating aspects of the narrative. Rather than assembling a team of political advisors, rather than seeking media support, William allegedly turned towards someone whose reputation inside the royal family has been built upon discipline, institutional knowledge, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Princess Anne. According to many royal commentators, Anne's involvement immediately changed the nature of the situation because she has long been viewed as one of the monarchy's strongest defenders of tradition and constitutional order. Throughout her life, she has consistently demonstrated a willingness to place institutional stability above personal preference, making her an obvious ally for anyone concerned about protecting established boundaries. Supporters of the narrative argue that William understood this better than anyone. The alleged discussions between William and Anne quickly became the subject of speculation among royal observers. Not because either figure publicly acknowledged them, but because their partnership seemed entirely plausible. Both are frequently associated with duty, both are associated with discipline, and both are often portrayed as individuals who place the long-term interests of the institution above short-term political considerations. According to supporters of the narrative, it was during this period that attention allegedly shifted away from the proposal itself and towards something far more unexpected. Deep inside the monarchy's legal history, hidden among centuries of constitutional precedent and royal legislation, William and Anne supposedly discovered an argument rooted in a law dating back to the reign of King George III. And according to many commentators, that discovery would transform the entire confrontation because the debate was no longer about personalities, family dynamics, or palace politics. It was about whether history itself could be used as a weapon in a modern royal power struggle. According to many royal commentators, the moment Princess Anne allegedly became involved is the point where the narrative transforms from a story about palace rumors into a story about institutional power. Supporters of the narrative argue that William understood something important from the very beginning. If the issue truly concerned the future boundaries of royal authority, then it could not be resolved through emotion, personal opinion, or media pressure. It would have to be addressed through precedent, constitutional principle, and the historical framework that has governed the monarchy for centuries. This is why, according to the story, William allegedly turned to the one person whose reputation for discipline and loyalty to the institution has rarely been questioned, Princess Anne. For decades, Anne has been viewed as one of the strongest defenders of royal tradition, someone who consistently places duty above personal relationships, and who possesses an extraordinary understanding of how the monarchy functions behind closed doors. According to supporters of the narrative, the conversations between William and Anne allegedly centered on a single question. If a proposal existed that sought to alter the established boundaries of royal recognition, did historical precedent provide any mechanism for challenging it? What happened next is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. According to reports circulating among royal commentators, William and Anne allegedly began examining historical records, constitutional documents, and royal precedents that stretched back centuries. The monarchy, after all, is not merely a family but an institution built upon accumulated laws, conventions, and decisions made by previous generations of sovereigns. Supporters of the narrative claim that during this process attention eventually focused on legislation dating back to the reign of King George III, specifically the famous Royal Marriages Act of 1772. The law itself was originally created to regulate marriages involving members of the royal family, but according to the narrative, William and Anne allegedly became interested in the broader constitutional principles surrounding royal consent, succession, and the protection of the direct line of inheritance. Whether the legal interpretation described in the story would actually withstand constitutional scrutiny remains a matter of significant debate among experts. Nevertheless, supporters of the narrative argue that the law became symbolically important because it represented something much larger than its original purpose. It represented continuity, it represented historical legitimacy, and most importantly, it represented the idea that the monarchy structure cannot simply be reshaped through private agreements or informal arrangements. According to many commentators, this alleged discovery immediately changed the strategic landscape because the discussion was no longer about personalities. It was no longer about Camilla, William, or even Charles as individuals. Instead, the debate allegedly shifted toward questions involving constitutional authority, institutional legitimacy, and the future definition of the royal family itself. Supporters of the narrative claim that William and Anne gradually concluded that any attempt to expand royal recognition beyond traditional boundaries would require a level of constitutional support far greater than a privately signed proposal could provide. This belief allegedly strengthened their resolve and convinced them that the issue demanded a coordinated response. What makes this part of the story particularly compelling for royal audiences is the imagery attached to it. Commentators frequently describe William and Anne not as emotional rivals reacting to palace drama, but as guardians of the institution studying centuries of royal history in search of answers. Whether that image accurately reflects reality is impossible to verify, yet it resonates strongly because it aligns with how many observers already view both figures. William is often portrayed as a future king focused on protecting the monarchy's long-term future, while Anne is frequently portrayed as the monarchy's most reliable defender of tradition. According to supporters of the narrative, this combination allegedly created a powerful alliance. One represented the future, the other represented continuity with the past. Together, they supposedly began preparing a response that would rely not on confrontation but on procedure, protocol, and institutional authority. And according to many royal commentators, this is where the story becomes even more fascinating, because while William and Anne were allegedly building their case behind the scenes, supporters of the proposal reportedly believed everything was proceeding exactly according to plan, completely unaware that a much larger counter-strategy was already beginning to take shape deep within the machinery of the monarchy itself. According to many royal commentators, the most dramatic phase of the narrative allegedly begins at precisely the moment when supporters of the proposal believed victory was already secured. This is what makes the story so compelling for many royal observers. The narrative is built around a complete reversal of expectations. On one side were individuals who allegedly believed the necessary approvals had already been obtained and that future recognition for Camilla's wider family was only a matter of time. On the other side were William and Anne, who, according to supporters of the narrative, were quietly constructing an entirely different strategy behind palace walls. Rather than launching public objections, they allegedly focused on something far more effective: controlling the administrative machinery through which royal privileges are actually implemented. According to many commentators, this distinction became crucial because a proposal, regardless of how impressive it appeared on paper, could only become reality if the institutions responsible for protocol, guest access, ceremonial participation, and official recognition chose to act upon it. According to supporters of the narrative, William and allegedly understood this principle better than anyone. They recognized that royal influence is often exercised not through dramatic speeches but through procedures, approvals, invitations, credentials, and layers of protocol that determine who may participate in the monarchy's most important functions. As a result, they reportedly focused their attention on those systems. Guest lists allegedly came under closer review. Ceremonial arrangements were examined. Administrative permissions were reassessed. And according to supporters of the story, every aspect of future royal events began receiving scrutiny through the lens of institutional legitimacy rather than personal relationships. What makes this stage of the narrative especially fascinating is that it allegedly unfolded almost entirely out of public view. There were no newspaper headlines announcing a palace conflict. There were no public accusations. And there was no visible sign that competing strategies were developing simultaneously inside royal circles. To outside observers, everything appeared perfectly normal. Official engagements continued. Public appearances proceeded without interruption. And the monarchy projected its usual image of continuity and stability. Yet according to supporters of the narrative, significant changes were already taking place behind the scenes. Many royal commentators argue that this reflects how real institutional power often operates. The public tends to focus on visible events, while the most important decisions are frequently made long before those events ever occur. Supporters of the narrative claim that William and allegedly concentrated on the practical realities of implementation. Who receives invitations? Who receives credentials? Who receives official recognition? Who appears within formal royal settings? These questions may seem technical, yet they ultimately determine how authority is expressed within the institution. According to the story, this is where the alleged alliance between William and Anne became particularly effective. William represented the future direction of the monarchy and represented continuity with its traditions. Together, supporters of the narrative argue, they formed a partnership capable of combining modern strategic thinking with deep institutional knowledge. As a result, every procedural decision allegedly reinforced a single objective: preserving what they viewed as the established boundaries of the royal family. Whether such coordination ever occurred remains impossible to independently verify. However, within the narrative, it becomes the turning point that shifts momentum away from the proposal and toward its opponents. According to many observers, the most important aspect of this phase is that supporters of the proposal reportedly remained confident. They allegedly believed the necessary groundwork had already been completed and that future recognition was only awaiting formal implementation. This confidence, supporters of the narrative argue, prevented them from recognizing how dramatically the situation had changed. While they focused on the existence of the proposal itself, William and were allegedly concentrating on the systems that would determine whether the proposal carried any practical effect at all. The symbolism attached to this part of the story is particularly powerful for royal audiences. It presents William not as an emotional rival, not as a public critic, but as a future king preparing for leadership through patience, planning, and institutional discipline. Likewise, it presents and not as a participant in family drama, but as a guardian of royal tradition determined to defend constitutional boundaries regardless of personal relationships. According to supporters of the narrative, these roles made their partnership especially formidable. As speculation surrounding the situation continued growing, many commentators began suggesting that a direct confrontation had become almost inevitable. The proposal existed, the counter-strategy allegedly existed, expectations were rising on both sides, and the question was no longer whether the issue would reach a decisive moment, but when. According to supporters of the narrative, that moment would finally arrive during a major royal occasion where protocol, guest access, and public visibility would all collide at once, creating the perfect stage for the dramatic showdown that would ultimately determine whose vision of the monarchy would prevail. According to many royal commentators, the final chapter of the narrative allegedly arrives during a moment when all of the competing forces that have been building throughout the story finally collide. Supporters of the narrative argue that what began as a quiet proposal involving status, recognition, and influence ultimately evolved into a much larger debate about the future identity of the monarchy itself. By this stage, the issue was no longer simply about individual personalities or family relationships. Instead, it had become a question of principle. Should the institution continue expanding outward to include a broader network of royal connections, or should it move toward the smaller, more concentrated model that many observers associate with Prince William's vision for the future? According to supporters of the narrative, this question sat at the center of everything that followed. According to the story, the alleged confrontation did not resemble the dramatic scenes often portrayed in films or television dramas. There were no public arguments, no emotional press conferences, and no visible palace crisis. Instead, the outcome supposedly emerged through protocol, procedure, and institutional authority. Supporters of the narrative claim that when the various proposals, requests, and expectations were finally subjected to formal review, they encountered a reality that centuries of royal history had reinforced repeatedly. The monarchy operates according to established rules, according to precedent, and according to constitutional limitations that cannot easily be bypassed. As a result, they argue that many of the anticipated changes simply failed to materialize. What makes this alleged outcome particularly significant for supporters of the narrative is the symbolism attached to it. They view it as evidence that William's approach to leadership differs fundamentally from the image often projected by his critics. Rather than relying on public confrontation, they argue he prefers preparation. Rather than pursuing personal disputes, he focuses on institutional objectives. And rather than seeking short-term victories, he concentrates on shaping the long-term direction of the monarchy. Whether this interpretation accurately reflects reality remains impossible to verify, but it has become one of the dominant themes surrounding discussions of William's future reign. Supporters of the narrative also argue that Princess Anne's role proved crucial. Throughout the story, she is portrayed as a stabilizing force, a defender of tradition, and someone deeply committed to preserving the constitutional foundations of the crown. According to many commentators, Anne's involvement reinforced the perception that the debate was never truly about personalities. It was about boundaries, about institutional continuity, and about protecting principles that have guided the monarchy across generations. This interpretation helps explain why the story has resonated so strongly with many royal audiences. It combines several themes that consistently generate public interest: succession, tradition, power, duty, and the relationship between history and modern leadership. Supporters of the narrative argue that the alleged use of historical precedent, including references to centuries-old royal legislation, symbolizes a broader truth about the monarchy itself. While individual figures come and go, the institution endures because it is anchored in rules and traditions that extend far beyond any single reign. According to many observers, the larger implication of a story concerns William's future as king. If the narrative is accurate, they argue, it offers a preview of how he may approach future challenges. Carefully, methodically, and with a strong emphasis on institutional discipline. Rather than seeking popularity through dramatic gestures, supporters believe he may prioritize clarity, efficiency, and constitutional legitimacy. Whether that approach ultimately succeeds is something only time can determine. Yet many commentators view the story as an early glimpse into the leadership style that could define the next era of royal history. At the same time, King Charles remains an important part of the narrative. According to supporters of the story, Charles is often portrayed as balancing competing responsibilities between family loyalty and institutional duty. His reign has already required him to navigate complex challenges while guiding the monarchy through a period of transition. As a result, many observers believe the future relationship between Charles's vision and William's vision will continue shaping public discussions for years to come. And according to many royal commentators, that may be the true significance of the entire story. The narrative is not really about one proposal, one law, or one family disagreement. It is about the gradual emergence of a future monarchy and the choices that will determine its direction. It is about a future king preparing for responsibilities that grow larger with every passing year. And it is about the enduring tension between tradition and change that has defined the British monarchy throughout its history. What do you think? Would Prince William's future monarchy benefit from a smaller and more focused royal structure, or should the institution continue embracing a broader royal family presence? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this debate remains one of the most discussed topics among royal watchers around the world. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of Prince William, Princess and Queen Camilla, and King Charles III. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.